So let's start about how I structured this presentation. Very simply, first and foremost, I really want to get the message out that entrepreneurship is a growth and value-creating activity for any business, family or non-family. It's a concept that's been around for many, many years. But more importantly than that, for business, families that are in business, family enterprises like yourselves, it's a great tool for developing your human capital, which is often the struggle that you have when you're looking for business continuity and legacy in a family business setup. And finally, I want to set you up to launch your own entrepreneurial journey as you leave here in the next few days and take some steps towards, at least as a bare minimum, initiating a conversation with your next generation, or if you are the next generation, initiating that conversation with your management or ownership generations and convince them that entrepreneurship is a tool that you must have in your toolbox if you are to move your family businesses forward. So let's talk a little bit about what entrepreneurship is and what it's not. Often when I first speak to people on entrepreneurship, the concept of the word intrapreneurship is very foreign to most people. In fact, I'm guaranteeing you that the majority of the folks in this room, prior to having read about entrepreneurship on the website for this conference, probably have never heard of the term. So entrepreneurship, first of all, is not a buzzword. It's been around for about 30 years, and it's been mastered by companies, family and non-family businesses alike, that have been able to sustain diversification and growth over time. The other thing is that entrepreneurship is not entrepreneurship. You're getting a lot of competition from entrepreneurship, looking as a very attractive, sort of the sexy person in the room that is drawing your next generation outside of your family businesses. And the reality is that entrepreneurship, the world of pure startups, which I know very well because I also work in that world, is a very different world and is a very high-risk sport. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And finally, entrepreneurship is not love money, right? It's not just giving money to your next generation to make them feel like you're supporting them, but without giving them any context or any other assistance but the financial one. What entrepreneurship is about monetizing an innovation and turning it into a profitable and sustainable business within your corporate or family business environment. A key word here, by leveraging the corporation to position innovations in the marketplace as viable businesses that drive new sources of profit. We spend a lot of time in our program at the Business Families Foundation making sure that people understand the key word here, which is leveraging. Why leveraging? If all you are is an entrepreneur in a startup world, as we all get to see in the news almost on a daily basis, you start a business on your own and you feel very alone. The entrepreneur, however, has a huge advantage because they're able to go inside the mother company that is supporting them, the parent company, the mothership that is supporting them, and draw on various resources. And every enterprise, depending on the family business supporting it, will have a very different mapping on how this works. And I'll get back to that towards the end of the presentation. But certainly, there are people, technology, resources, production or engineering that can help you develop a new concept very rapidly. Locations to help you reach your market space much more effectively. Processes, distribution channels, and the list goes on and on. But more importantly than that, and I love the introduction that you had on the video. It's about the fact that you can have access to people that you can trust, that are willing to share their experience, and that are willing to open their networks, family or business, to help you, the entrepreneur, move much, much, much faster than an independent startup could on their own, isolated. And I know how difficult that is for those folks. So the leveraging aspect is key to the whole conversation today. Let me give you a real example. I want all of you to imagine for a second that you are all owners of a family business that has been running garages around your city, your province maybe, or maybe across the country, and that's what you've been doing for several generations. You're all with me? You're all running one or several garages around Halifax. Your daughters, your sons, your nieces and nephews have probably been working during their summer jobs, either with the mechanics or in the front office or at customer service or doing some paperwork, and they all have a context of what that garage business sounds like, looks like, feels like, smells like. One of your sons or daughters comes to you and says, I have an idea. I think we can diversify the business and create a new location in some other part of the province or maybe across Canada somewhere. But I'd like to lead that particular garage on my own. I need your help, but I want to run it differently. I want to operate it differently, and maybe I want to bring in new technologies and new know-how that we haven't been using in our core garage business. Entrepreneurship. A niece or a nephew comes to you with another idea. They're maybe more environmentally conscious, maybe more socially conscious, and they say, you know, I just don't like the idea of working in a business that just encourages, you know, the widening of a worse environmental footprint with traditional cars, the pollution that they bring. I'd like to start a new line of business around converting cars to electrical cars. I've done all the research, I've looked into the technology, and I'd like to create this business within the business. I'd like to lead it, but I'm going to need some support. Entrepreneurship. One of your nieces comes to you, or to the family council, or to the business council, and says, you know, I've been working at the front end of this business for 3 summers now, and I hear how frustrating it is for people to make a reservations, to book a time slot, to come and change their tires or get an oil change. They need time off work. They need to arrange babysitters or daycare center extensions or all kinds of logistical nightmares, which we've all lived when we have to do a simple task, which is to get a check for our car, to get our cars checked. And so they come up with a concept that says, what if we had these vans and we equipped the vans with all the tools, all the products and the technology that we need to go to people's locations, to go to their houses or to go to their business sites or anywhere else for that matter, and we could develop an application, because with the technology is there today, where people could simply book their time, tell us where the keys will be, and pay remotely, electronically. And but I'd like to run that business, but I'm going to need some help. Entrepreneurship. Now we're moving further away from your core business activities, and I'm purposely doing this. One of your daughters comes to you and says, you know, I've been working with the mechanics now for 3 summers, and my hands are just a nightmare, and my gosh, you should see the hands of these guys. They're beaten up, they're using products, acids, all kinds of things that are very dangerous, and I mean, they have the worst hands. I've developed, or I'd like to develop, a cream that is aimed at those types of workers, you know, workers that are in that heavy industry type of environment. And it'll be organic, and dare I say gluten-free, because everything is these days, right? And so you can even eat it. And so they come to you and they say, you know, can you please help me with this? Entrepreneurship. But what if your sons and daughters are not, business-minded in a traditional sense? What if they're very, very socially driven? What if they come to you with an idea that says, I'd like us to start a food bank. We've acquired a lot of wealth in our family, and it's time to give back. I'd like to launch a food bank or some sort of a support center for the needy. I certainly need to build a business. I need to understand how it works. I need to understand the non-for-profit environment, but I'm going to need some help. Entrepreneurship. And finally, what if several of your nieces and nephews get together and they say, it's long overdue that we should have a philanthropic activity, but a more formal one. We tend to be generous, but what if we, standardize that particular activity? We're going to need business sense. We're going to have to be entrepreneurial. We're going to have to figure it out, but we're going to need some help. This is the world of entrepreneurship and how it applies to your family businesses every day, every year, every generation. And some companies have been very successful at saying, here are the possibilities of working within the family enterprise. But here's the difference. When you talk to your next gen, you're telling them, you get to come in under your own terms. You get to lead the activity that you've chosen, but we'll be there to support you. The difference between them doing it within your business or leaving and doing exactly that on their own as a pure startup is the big difference between entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. Winning at intrapreneurship is ultimately about understanding how to leverage your core business. But also, for family businesses, having a conversation that these possibilities are open to every member of your family. Now, I hope we're all on the same page about what intrapreneurship is. In terms of understanding how to identify, pick out, and launch enterprises in your own businesses, this is where it begins. And I'll give you a few more examples as we go on. I didn't invent the term. Very successful businesses have been doing this for decades. In fact, some of the top logos that you see there are Canadian family enterprises, owned and or operated by families. And then you have a mix of different companies worldwide. Every field, every domain, the concept is proven. The tricky part is how do you make it happen and how do you do so effectively and in a recurrent fashion. So it becomes just another business process that you use to diversify your businesses, grow your businesses, and create leadership talent for both management and ownership succession. Because, make no mistake about it, the intrapreneur gets to launch their business, grow it, scale it, make some mistakes, do some pivoting, adapt to the market space, which are all key in developing successors for the future of your businesses, your core family enterprise. I love this article a couple of years ago in Fast Company, which said, it was titled The Rise of the Intrapreneur, and it really captured the next generation, the Gen Y, very, very well, very effectively. Never has there been such a push for employees to take ownership of their own corner of the company. This is what your Gen Ys coming into the marketplace are looking for. Now, ownership doesn't necessarily mean financial ownership. It means I have a say in what I do, and I believe that I'm making a difference in what I'm doing day in and day out. So let's talk a little bit about financing, because this is a key aspect when we talk to families about the program that we've launched in Montreal. So as I've mentioned before, if your nieces, nephews, sons, daughters come to you with an idea, and you say, great, I'll cut you a check. If that's all it is, you're around the love money concept. Nothing wrong with that. It's a choice. Certainly not either entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship. If you cut them a check with a set of expectations around equity, maybe sweat equity on their part, maybe the concept of a loan, there's something to be paid back, then you're getting closer to entrepreneurship, right? You're kind of being a seed funder, an angel investor, as we like to call them, and that's fine. But again, you haven't really given them a competitive advantage yet. And the failure rate in that second box there is 85 to 95%, right? The pure startups. Intrapreneurship says, I'll do the above, but I'll also open up the mothership to being able to help you in whichever way you define you will need help. And I'll get back to that in a few slides, right? So it's about having some sort of leverage, whether it's people, resources, capabilities that you already have as a working business, and saying, we can give you access to pieces of the business that can help you move faster and de-risk your chances of failure. Virgin, in any book that you read about intrapreneurship, if there's a poster child, it's Virgin. Why? Because Virgin has created over 400 businesses using intrapreneurship. They've been studied, and what's impressive about this slide is not just the numbers, but the variety of businesses that are up there. From airplanes to telephones, from media to radio, to healthcare, to I think alcohol, and everything else in between. And in fact, when interviewed several years ago, Sir Richard Branson had this to say: Virgin could not have grown into the group of more than 200, which was at the time, now there are 400 companies it is now, were it not for the steady stream of intrapreneurs who looked for and developed opportunities, often leading efforts going against the grain, because it is a little difficult to be an entrepreneur and to get the company to move in the direction that you're seeking. Take another example that is often misunderstood: Steve Jobs. Now, everybody thinks of him as an entrepreneur. He was when he first started in the garage. But after he started launching the other businesses and lines of businesses, he became an intrapreneur. Interviewed in 1985, he said the Macintosh team, that goes back, was what is commonly known as intrapreneurship, a group of people going, in essence, back to the garage, but in a large company. Now let me give you an impressive family business example. Some of you might know the Moulier family out of Europe. The Moulier family has created an empire of about $70 billion in revenues, about 400,000 employees worldwide. Now, for those of you that don't recognize any of the brands, let me give you an example. It's as if you owned and operated and had launched within an entrepreneuring business the equivalent of Home Hardware or Renault Depot or Home Depot, at the same time as having launched Sports Expert and Atmosphere, at the same time as having launched the equivalent of a Canadian Walmart, at the same time as having launched different products in restoration, in brewing companies, and everything else in between. So very similar at a smaller scale to the Virgin example. They have put forward a very rigid and a very structured entrepreneurship program to give access in a very structured way to every family member to become entrepreneurial and to launch a business the way they want to launch it, but by continuing to grow the wealth of the business and by developing business leaders across the spectrum. So they're well set up for multi-generational success. I talked about the competition of intrapreneurship that your Gen Ys have vis-a-vis entrepreneurship. It's a key takeaway because the reality is that there isn't a day that goes by that we're not exposed to an entrepreneurship story. Some startup on the radio, in the papers, in social media, somewhere is being talked about on a daily basis. More than that, there are startup events everywhere. There are incubators and accelerators in every university, colleges, and every corner that you turn. But the reality is they always talk about the successes, but like I said, the failure rate is 85, and it can be upwards of 95% if you're in the technology field. You never heard about the failures. You only hear about the successes. I'm not trying to scare people from being entrepreneurial, but the reality is that when we study businesses that fail at entrepreneurship, there are 3 reasons. 1, they surround themselves with the wrong people that don't have their best interest in mind. Not the case for family. Number 2, they have a difficulty scaling their business. So everybody more or less can have an initial success of selling more or less anything a couple of times, but from selling a couple of things to sustaining a business and growing it and having profitability in a repeatable manner is very challenging. So difficulty accessing experience and knowledge and resources to scale your business. And thirdly, they're so preoccupied with their next round of financing, which is happening almost every couple of months, that they're losing focus on the actual business idea that they launched in the first place. So they're getting further and further away from their customers. Again, something that the family enterprise can avoid, because you're looking about a different type of partnership. So that is the reality of what your Gen Ys are seeing without seeing the reverse side of it, which is the failure rates. And I say that because, there are no movies about entrepreneurs, and there are certainly no movies about failing entrepreneurs. What we do see, though, is all the movies in the media around the success of pure entrepreneurs. But as I've mentioned before, 2 out of 3 of these folks here had to go from entrepreneurship to intrapreneurship very, very quickly to succeed. So that is the competition in terms of one of the reasons that you might lose your Gen Ys to the outside, and without having them come back. When I show people this slide, they often think that these are all entrepreneurship examples. But in fact, if you remove Uber, Tesla, Flickr, and let's say Facebook, what you're left with are intrapreneurial successes. Companies going out of their traditional businesses to create new businesses. When Amazon, which is an e-commerce business, decided to launch the e-reader, they were going into an entrepreneurship mindset. They leveraged internal technology and capabilities to create a new market for themselves. When Gmail, which was a search engine, decided to now launch an email, which has become the world's most adopted email system, Gmail, they went from being one type of business to another. And the list goes on. So, entrepreneurship is not entrepreneurship. You've been with me now for about 20-25 minutes. Let's go into why entrepreneurship is similar to entrepreneurship. Because it is ultimately about feeding the entrepreneurial appetite that we know children of entrepreneurial families have. Right? Studies have been made. I saw a recent study out of Sweden that was trying to pinpoint, the exact why as to the fact that everybody believes and knows now that children of family businesses tend to be entrepreneurial. So it's a fact. And so it is about feeding the entrepreneurial spirit, quenching that thirst, but without the aggressive short-term angel investor network, without constantly raising funds, and certainly without being alone. With, however, the advantage that the family offers: better financing options, patient investors, and access to a lot more capabilities to scale the business successfully. It can come with some restrictions, and we'll talk about establishing a good sandbox for the entrepreneur that allows the entrepreneur to have the freedom of movement they need to be entrepreneurial, so as to not to limit them too specifically on how they grow their business. I believe that intrapreneurship is the bridge to the startup world of entrepreneurship for Gen Ys that are looking to take advantage of the family business. For me, this is a key takeaway. And we've seen it now in the program that we've been running now for the last year and a half. Certainly the people that graduate from the cohort are talking about, I never knew that this avenue existed. I never knew as a Gen Y that I could have a conversation with my parents to say, I have an idea, will you listen? I never knew that I had a son or a daughter that had the capability to be entrepreneurial and the ability and the drive to want to start something on their own. That's the bridge that I'm hoping you will build today after this presentation. Because I give a whole presentation on how Gen Ys are different and why intrapreneurship speaks to them. I'll give it to you in one slide. Intrapreneurship is an opportunity for Gen Ys to answer a lot of the key drivers that they have within that particular generation. They want to make their own mark. So you might want them to be forced into your family business the way you run it today. They're not interested for the most part. They want to have their own impact in the world around them, either social, environmental, or even economic. They want to do it on their own terms. And they want to develop their business ideas, leveraging their own generation's tools, be it social media, technology, and all other types of new ways of running businesses that we see coming at us at a very rapid pace. And it is about leveraging the business where it makes sense. And we'll get to the where it makes sense, because if you are leaving here thinking, great, I'm going to talk to my son, daughter, niece, nephew, we're going to have a conversation, and I'm going to tell them which business to launch, and I'm going to tell them how to launch it, I failed. You boo me off the stage. Right? You have to leave here saying, got it, we'll have this conversation, we'll initiate some ideas, and then what we'll do is we'll see, once the business plan is more or less developed, where we can begin to see where we can propose to provide some assistance from the core business. Right? And in that conversation of equals to equals is where the home run happens, right? Where the aha moment is. Oh, okay, so you mean your company, mom, dad, could help me with this? Yeah, absolutely, but only if you want to. No, that sounds good. But I like to do this part on my own. It makes a lot of sense. You do that part on your own. Right? That's the conversation that we're having. So why is it such an important tool for family businesses? I can tell you from somebody that's come into your world over the last year and a half or so, when I look at the world of family businesses, for me, if I took all family businesses as one market, which you couldn't do, but if I did that, I would say, wow, why would I even get into the family business world? Right? 13% of businesses will not make it past the third generation. These are not my numbers. These are well-studied numbers. Less than 5% of the next generation are interested, that are in their 30s or so, are interested in taking over the business the way it stands today. And on top of that, half of you in the room all of you in the room, have as a major concern the succession of your businesses, but only 17% of you have a succession plan that's formalized. So if I'm looking to invest in a market called family businesses, why would I? On top of that, when I study the world that you live in, I see 5 big pressure points that are coming at you. Number one, at the top, at the 12 o'clock point, business families have a difficulty attracting the next gen from a family perspective. On top of it, the Gen Ys that are coming in have a very different sense of what they're looking for from a business. And I've talked about that before. Number 3, when you look at studies that are done more or less annually from the big consulting firm, KPMG, PwC, Deloitte, Boston Consulting, all those guys, I see them all on an annual basis. The number one, number two, or number three concern from CEOs worldwide, families or not, is being able to create diversification from within. It's called organic growth, right? Versus acquiring new businesses, which is very expensive and actually has a higher failure rate. So everybody wants to do organic growth. It's a bit slower, but it's a higher success rate. And so entrepreneurship is all about growth from within. The rise and dominance of entrepreneurship, I spoke about it in the first part of the presentation. And finally, confusing entrepreneurship with intrapreneurship. I've seen many companies go, great, we want to act like entrepreneurs, so let's just do it. Until we realize that entrepreneurs and intrapreneurs are very different. There's not one company out there that actually gives you a perfectly wide canvas of do anything that you wish within any field and market, and we'll be okay with that, right? You do have some constraints and lots of advantages when you're an entrepreneur. And so these are the pressures that you're facing as a family business. And what really worries me is the concept of the boomerang kid. Now, we all know this one, right? The boomerang child is when you have a child that's grown, moved out, independent on their own, and they come back after a few years because of financial difficulties usually, and they come back to live with you, right? So I've invented a new term for this particular conference. You're the first to hear it. I call it the boomerang next gen. Without entrepreneurship or a tool of that nature, many of you in this room are hoping that you will launch your next gen out in the world. And without a communication and without a structured approach, you are hoping that they will come back to your family business eventually. And the reality is, it rarely works that way. Once they're out there, very hard for them to come back, especially if they don't think they can, or if there's not an avenue for them to come back into your business. And hope is not a strategy. That's your second takeaway. I hope that's an insight. That's going to be on somebody's sheet before the end of the day. Right? Hope is not a strategy. You've got to structure something, whether it's entrepreneurship or something else. I really don't care. It's a choice. But certainly it becomes a tool of saying, you know what? If we can interest them in launching their own business, and through that business, they're going to learn a little bit of what our core business does because they're going to tap into it for help and support along the way, then there's a pretty good likelihood that over time, as they develop their leadership, management, and financial acumen, that they will eventually say, you know what? I'd like to do something bigger and better, and I'm starting to get interested again in the family enterprise. Now, how cool would that be? Right? You go from hope to a plan. That's always a better chance of success. Like I said, I didn't invent some of these issues in terms of how they're documented, but I did do a lot of research to understand your world very well. And I love this excerpt from a Harvard Business article written a couple of years ago, which looked at, again, the best practices for family businesses that last multi-generations. Okay? And so the orange is the important part. Number one, successful families see important changes in their industries and adapt by diversifying. Entrepreneurship. Number two, they're very good at investing in productive activities, including the development of the next generation, and they maintain a culture that encourages family members to create things of lasting value. Entrepreneurship. Thirdly, they, strong family missions, and importantly, they invest in family entrepreneurs so as to keep talented members contributing to the broader family wealth and mission. Entrepreneurship. Now, I swore that I would not make this another presentation on the three-circle model, so I just have one slide. All right? Bear with me. I still believe, as I've looked at all the studies, that this is the model that successful families need to master. Right? The concept that you need to manage your family, your business, and your ownership circles differently, but realizing that they're intertwined and that you have people that are working at different intersections or exposed to different intersections of those three circles. If you look at the business circle, entrepreneurship delivers business diversification and growth, and it creates new businesses or lines of business. Very important when you're looking to sustain your businesses. If you look at the family circle, it provides entrepreneurial next generation members an opportunity to enter the family, but on their terms, on new terms. Entrepreneurship helps you there. And finally, in the ownership circle, it creates value by adding sources of revenues and profits, right? And so as your entrepreneurs begin to evolve in their own companies or their own part of the business, and they develop these types of skills and capabilities, they become very attractive for your business and or ownership succession plans. I love this particular, actually the person might be in the room, KPMG Enterprise Center for Family Businesses, one of your members out of Ottawa. Is he here? You recognize your work? There he is. Thank you. Saw that, I love the paper that the white paper on this of a couple of years ago, where put forward the concept that, succession is about two things, management and ownership succession. And the activities that you put at the center of those plans are key to ensuring the long-term success of your business. Unfortunately, too many businesses think of ownership succession, think of the financial aspects, and forget to think about the management succession. And it comes too late. And you haven't equipped your next gen with the tools to be able to take on that role. Okay, so entrepreneurship helps you because of that communication, that center set of boxes. It helps you groom successors. It certainly helps you develop in them management processes that are important in terms of running businesses. And it also helps you in terms of family governance and your shareholder agreements. I like to talk to people about entrepreneurs as the dreamers and doers. I didn't invent this term. I love this term. If all you have is dreamers in your next gens, then they have great ideas, but they can't execute. If all you have is doers, great executing, but they're not able to look in the long term, right? So you're not looking for everybody to be dreamers and doers, but studies have been made on entrepreneurship and the skills required to be successful entrepreneurs, and they all highlight the same thing. First of all, entrepreneurs are comfortable with uncertainty. And in a world that is changing as rapidly as ours is, this is a key character that you need to have for succession in the long term. They're risk takers, but calculated risk takers. So they're able to look at the world around them and understand what it takes to adapt to the world and take risks as stewards of the enterprise that they're looking after. They're not generally motivated by money. They're actually motivated by a sense of answering this call that they have to do whatever it is they're bringing forward in the business. They're certainly resilient and persevering because to launch an enterprise is quite the challenge as you begin to understand the market, adapt, and see how your business needs to move to really make it last and make it scale properly. They're comfortable pivoting, changing directions in a high-paced environment. And they know how to leverage the internal business, which is key to diversification. So these are well-documented pieces from a gentleman who launched entrepreneurship years and years ago. The guy who coined the term, Gifford Pinchot, came up with this concept, and I've adopted it ever since. So you're looking to develop your succession because of the skills that you're able to develop through your entrepreneurs. So how does it live in your business? Entrepreneurship is a strategic tool to start with. So you're going down this path because you're saying to yourself, we need to create new businesses, new business concepts or ideas. If not, we will be in trouble in the long term. And it's typically because you're looking to address one of five things. Either you're looking to go broader with the customer base that you have. Most businesses can do that. We already serve these customers. What else could we give them in terms of a product or service? Entrepreneurs are usually people that can help you identify that and bring those ideas forward. Second, it could be to create a new line of business adjacent to the one that you're already running. If you think of the garage example, the converting into electric cars or the vans going to your customers is adjacent to what you're doing today. You can go brand new and enter a new market, like the hand cream as an example. Or it's simply about maintaining market leadership. Maybe you need to add things to your existing business. If not, other people will catch up and pass you. Rarely, but it does happen, entrepreneurship is about reinventing your business model because in the long term, you see that you're going to become obsolete as a business. Okay, so this is how it lives as a strategic tool in your business. How does your entrepreneur help you do this while you help them drive their passion, their entrepreneurial spirit forward? I talked about how to leverage the business, and I told you I'd come back to it. Here it is. Now, I don't have everything listed, but on the left axis, the y-axis, are typical functions that exist within your respective businesses, right? You have some or all of these and probably several others. The trick is to identify in blue, as purely a fictitious example, the types of business processes and functions that the entrepreneur believes they should do on their own because of the types of market they're entering, versus the types of functions in orange that your entrepreneur can leverage effectively from inside the mothership instead of having to recreate it really for no value to the actual business idea. And the game is really played here because it's not about the parent saying you shall use 1, 5, 7, 9, and 10. It's more about, I've really understood what you are trying to do. Let me tell you what the business can offer. You decide if it makes sense for the launch and the scaling of your operation. Let me give you access to some of my key people and let them share their experiences about maybe some of the things they've tried to do in the past and in areas that may or may not impact your particular business idea. So this is where the game is played. That horizontal black bar moves up and down, not only for every business, but at every stage of the business. How do you start your entrepreneurial journey? I believe, especially in family businesses, you create a sandbox, you look for ideas, and you learn how to incubate businesses effectively. Okay? The sandbox is right here. The sandbox is a concept that I've always put forward. It basically says, okay, we're open to entrepreneurship, but there are going to be certain rules. The Moulier family, as a great example, has very specific rules as to how a family member can have access to this entrepreneurship type of activity. And the rules can be as diverse as your family businesses are, but they certainly need to be set. There's nothing more frustrating for an entrepreneur to be told, we're launching this, go and come back with some ideas, and when you're ready, we're ready to listen. They come back, they've done a great job, they've looked into the market, they really have a good idea. And you say to them, you know what, it's not really in line with where we're looking to go. I'll tell you, that person leaves your company, whether they're family or not, and launches it on their own. Because they've spent all this time on your dime on top of it, you know, developing an idea, only to find out that it's not really where you want it to go. It's okay not to accept an idea because, you know, not strong enough, not big enough, not fast enough, not whatever enough, but certainly not because it's not where we intended to go. That should be clear up front. For family businesses, when we have the entrepreneurs and their sponsors during the program, we make them go through this particular sandbox exercise. I believe that you should be thinking, frankly, for entrepreneurship or for other types of challenges that you may have in your family businesses, around governance, company or family values, resources, and expectations. Around governance, these are just to trigger your thoughts. If you're looking to launch an entrepreneurship initiative, starting with one or two or many, it doesn't matter, who can participate? Active or non-active family members? Family and or key employees? Who is this open to? Criteria for submitting and selecting ideas. You know, is this going to be sort of the we get to decide, we don't tell you what the criteria are, or are we going to be more transparent and open? What types of businesses are we willing to consider or not? What about our company brand, our existing company brand? Are we willing to put that at risk or not in being associated with this new business? And what are the rules of the game? On the company family values, very important. You know, if you're a very environmentally minded business and your next gen comes up with something that is counter to that, you might not want to consider it. What if they come to you with, you know, the vapes or what are those called? Anyway, you know, the replacement for cigarettes. Would you want to sponsor that business? Maybe, maybe not. And so there are different types of values that go around your business that should be clear up front. What resources are available? What will be your role as the sponsor, the existing generation that's running the business in terms of helping your entrepreneur? How will you give them access to resources and at what point? How will they get to leverage the business? And finally, what are your expectations of the entrepreneur? This is an important one because in the program, when we see, you know, one thing I'll explain it a bit later, but the entrepreneurship program that we run has 2 tracks. And you have to join as duo. You have to join as a sponsor, so you know, a business owner, and a son or daughter, or it could be a niece or nephew, but as a next gen. And you do the program together. And one of the things that comes out is it's clear up front that nobody made it clear as to what were the expectations of our time commitments in this initiative. What about their sweat equity? What about equity? What if you have somebody that wants to be a co-founder that's not part of the family? And the list goes on. And so this is not meant to really restrict, and I'm always careful. This is not meant to clip the wings of your entrepreneur. It's meant to establish broad guidelines so that they're able to understand the area and the room, the area and the freedom of movement that they have within their particular project. Key. How to generate ideas. When we have the entrepreneurs come through our program, some have a bunch of ideas and some have none. But the ones that have none are really entrepreneurial. They want to do something, they're just not sure they have an idea. And so we always tell them, go back to either your own experiences within the business or in life in general, and where have you found that you've always said, gosh, I could invent something much better than this, right? Or talk to your family and says, and say to them, are there issues that we're looking to resolve around these topics that interest me? Because I believe that I can lead us in a new direction, for this particular idea. Innovations. I didn't invent this. This is known science, but I always use it. Ideas can be new, incremental, or process-oriented. I always like to tell people that. So it can be new to the world, but those are very rare. Something that doesn't exist anywhere in the world. Could be an idea. And certainly they come about every once in a while. Often they may not be new to the world, but they're certainly new to your company. This is a great way to dislodge competitors. You're going to bring new concepts that exist somewhere else and bring it into your own company. The large part of innovations and diversification and growth comes from incremental, either additions or repositioning of your business or improvements to your existing offering. Certainly areas that your entrepreneurs can help you with. And in some cases, it's about people that know your business and say, there's got to be a better way to operate this business. So they come with a brand new process and or incremental improvements in how you run your business to become more effective. So you're not looking for new or different customers, you're just looking to better serve the customers you have. Okay, so be open to all of these areas of potential new ideas. I talked about the third element, which is how to incubate the business. This is very difficult. The old expression is, how long do you stay under the radar if you're an entrepreneur versus being exposed to the mothership? Because I always like to use the concept of the corporate immune system. Our own bodies have immune systems, and they are there to help us, right, to protect us against what they believe to be external invaders of any sort. A corporation can do that to a startup. In trying to help them, they squeeze the life out of them because they impose too much, too many processes, too many ways of doing things, which basically does not give the entrepreneur the agility that they need to launch and scale their business. So be very careful on how you incubate your business. Let the entrepreneur lead. And as a sponsor, you're a coach and a mentor. You're not the operator of the business, which is very hard to do for sponsors. Right? You're there to help them develop. You're not there to tell them how to run this new business. You're there to educate them and share intergenerational wisdom, experiences, knowledge, and advice. You're there to engage your senior leadership team inside your senior business to ensure that they are ready to support the startup. From leveraging lean startup concepts, if you guys or ladies have heard of lean startup, certainly a very good concept. I've used them. And there are lean startup concepts for existing businesses called lean startup for enterprises. Certainly some great concept around business model canvases, minimal viable products, and the way to test and validate business ideas. This is the kind of tools that we do provide during the program. So it's not your old school traditional business cases where people are in cubicles, never talking to customers, and they think they came up with a great idea. This really pushes people, startup leaders, intra or entrepreneurs, to get into the market space, test and validate hypotheses, and come back and validate their business model canvas. And finally, it's not about giving a big amount of money. Entrepreneurship is all about defining gates to say, you know what, we love your ideas. How much would you need to do the first phase? We need 25,000. We need to do a few studies, talk to some customers, and so on and so forth. Great. Let's start with 25, and if you are able to demonstrate the following, come back. and they demonstrate the following, and then they need another 50,000 now because they want to buy a piece of equipment or do some testing or something, and so on and so forth. It's very much an incremental investment. It's not, you know, here's a bunch of money and we'll see you in 3 years. And it's certainly not a boomerang throw. Here are 3 errors to avoid. If your enterprise looks too much like your core business, then you're meddling way too much. Because then it is your core business, and let's call it that way, and don't pretend that it's giving your next gen an opportunity to launch something new. So don't impose too many things, as I've said before. The sandbox is a general play area. I always used to tell people, you know, it's like when I had kids and I'm sitting at the park with your children, and there's a bunch of children and a bunch of parents. And there's a certain security that comes from having your children in a sandbox, right? And you're there on the bench talking to somebody else, not paying much attention, if you're a dad. And eventually, the child hops off, starts wandering, and that's your trigger. You run over, you say, you know what? Come back, Nicholas, Alexander, back in the box. And then you go back and you continue chatting, right? That's the concept of the sandbox. Make it big and large, let them operate within, and every once in a while, if they're getting out of it, say, you know, I think you're straying. And you bring them back in. Don't impose KPIs from a running business. A startup has a very different set of key performance indicators that do not look anywhere near what your core business performance indicators look like. It can't. You're launching a new business. So get familiar with what those KPIs should look like and track accordingly. And finally, don't keep your business leaders in your core business in the dark, because they're the ones ultimately that are already doing more than 100%, you know, of their days filled with stuff, and you're going to be asking them to become available to your entrepreneur if and when they need assistance. So they certainly need to be on board. As I look at the clock, time to wrap it up, right? So if I had to wrap it up, I just want to leave a couple of points with you. First, I really do want to emphasize that entrepreneurship, as certainly the way we've set it up in the program, and certainly from the examples I've given you, is really around managing your 3 circles and creating value in each of those areas and creating opportunities in each of those areas. But entrepreneurship is hard. And I would argue that entrepreneurship can be even harder in a family business context because the entrepreneur has to motivate you, the sponsor, and or the, you know, the family council and or the business council. Then they have to motivate your enterprise to help them in the way they need help to launch and scale their business. And then you have to make sure that you're managing family issues for those that will have the opportunity to launch an enterprise versus those that may not. And so, you know, if there's one thing that you read across all studies, and I know you'll speak about this for the next 2.5 days, you know, there are 3 criteria to successful multi-generational families, right? Communicate, communicate, communicate. I can't emphasize that enough. And around communication, I think George Bernard Shaw said it best. You know, the single problem in communication is the illusion that it's actually taking place. I'd like to say thank you very much. Hope I've kept your attention.